Hey everybody, Pastor Danny Coverstone. I had this dream early this morning, right around 4:31 is when I woke up. Shared it during our prayer event this morning. I want to share this dream. It's called the Rockwell dream. I think once you hear it, you'll understand why. I believe it's a very, very straightforward dream. So I had this last night, February 12th, 2022. I dreamed that I was standing in a small rural foyer, and I was drawn to a Norman Rockwell painting on the wall. It was that Thanksgiving freedom from want print that many of us are familiar with. A lady putting the turkey down, the grandfather standing behind, and everybody sitting around the table for his family. This painting, this picture was in a large gold painted, simple frame surrounded by artificial green ivy. As I stared at the picture, I was drawn into the scene, and I was sitting at the table as the grandmother brought in the turkey. The grandfather was looking out the window behind him, and suddenly shut the blinds quickly and gave his wife a very, very strange look. And at that moment, what sounded to me like gunfire and explosions were happening outside the window. Several of the kids started to jump up from the table to look outside, and the grandmother flat out screamed at them. I mean, screamed at them. Sit down, sit back down. And she said this: there's nothing going on outside. And she said it almost like staccato. There's nothing going on outside. And then she drew herself back into a peaceful smile form and went back to the turkey, almost as if nothing had happened. Those at the table knew that something was going on, though, and they started looking at their cell phones and pulling up news. When this happened, the grandfather yelled at them to put their phones away and stay focused on the family gathering. So both the grandfather and the grandmother have told these kids, stop it, shut up, listen, there's nothing going on outside. He kept looking back at the window, though, every time there was a significant noise from outside. And the grandmother had one of those just fake smiles that you know is just not real. She just kept smiling at the people, and she kept carving the turkey and just focused on it. There were plates passed to the grandmother. She filled each plate up and then sent it back around the table to feed the 10 to 12 people that were sitting at that table. The grandfather then told everybody to hold hands, and he said he would pray. 3 people at the table were watching the window and seemed to be very concerned. They were holding hands, but they were like this, looking at the window behind the grandfather. He then bowed his head, but said to them, ignore what was happening outside because nothing was happening outside. So obviously, these 2 people are aware something's going on, but he said literally, ignore what is happening outside because nothing is happening outside. Closed his eyes and began to pray. His lips were moving, but there was no sound coming out. But as he was doing this, the house began to shake, just sudden shakes. The grandmother kept watching the 3 kids, or the 3 people, who seemed concerned, and she kept saying, make sure that you keep your eyes shut and be quiet. And once again, the grandfather is praying. There's no words coming out of his mouth. His lips are moving, but there's no sound coming out. And every time, he kept kind of turning like this to look at the window behind him. But he kept his eyes shut. His mouth was moving. No words were coming out. He just kind of kept looking, obviously aware that something was out there. The noise outside got closer to the house, and it shook a few more times. And each time the grandfather would flinch like this. He would have the hands, and he would pull the hands up like this, but he would flinch. He would noticeably just a jerk, almost like a flinch, when the house would shake and the noise was outside. And said, amen, very loud like that, very exaggerated. Smiled at all those at the table, like, okay, guys, we're all right, it's fine. Then he said, let's eat and pretend it's all good. People began eating at the table. And after a few bites, you could see on the faces, these people were like, oh. There were hands coming up to their mouths, and you could tell faces like they bit into something that was very, very sour or bitter. The grandfather spoke up very loudly and said again, the food is so good. This food is so good. He was exaggerating it like that. The 3 people, and there was like a mother, a father, and a teenage son. Those 3 people that had expressed concern earlier looked at each other in disgust, and the teenage boy spoke up and said, no, this is really bad. At this point, the grandmother stood up and yelled, don't you talk to your pastor that way. She threw her napkin on the table in disgust. She got up and she covered all. She grabbed a big like a pitcher, had gravy in it, and she covered all 3 of those people's plates. Just those 3 people's plates. She covered them in gravy. I mean, it was coming over the top of the plate and pouring down. It covered everything on the plate. Then she said, This will make it easier to get it down, so stop complaining. The others kept chewing on their food, but they were looking around, but you could tell they did not like the taste of it. It was not good. And then it was then that I noticed that all these people, all the people, even the 3 people who were concerned, everybody was pale and looked like they lost a lot of weight. They looked malnourished. Clothes were ill-fitting on them. And then I heard a whistling sound, kind of like you hear when a missile's coming in some of the movies, like that. Like that. It wasn't wind, it was a whistling sound. And suddenly, the 3 people got up, looked out the window, and were concerned. We're like, everybody get down now. And so they jumped under the table. And in that moment, the house exploded. There was smoke, there was fire, there was destruction. I was like a part of the scene, but I couldn't feel heat, I couldn't feel wind, but I could just see the mess around me. And when it cleared, I could see the table was still there. But the damage to the people who had been sitting around it was catastrophic. They were all dead. And they'd been dismembered. There was blood everywhere. We were just kind of laying there. The plates of food were still on the table. The 3 people who had been concerned crawled out from under the table, and they sat down. And at the opposite end of the table, from the dead grandfather now, was the man that I see so often in my dreams. He pointed to each of the 3 people, and he said, You were wise to listen to the word, for that's what spared you from the destruction that's here and now. Warn the church to listen and to inspect every bite of their food.